What's up, everybody? It's Dad here, and today we are going to be taking a look at Survival Hunter Mythic Plus talents specifically. I'm doing this as a separate thing from like another like rotational guide or something like that, just so we can dive into every talent very specifically and kind of go one by one through everything. So it's going to be a little bit, long form. So if you're just looking for a TLDR as far as like what talents you should play, I'll go through my 4 builds for that so far. Now my first one here is my Coordinated Assault with Raptor Strike build. This is what I'm playing in every dungeon right now. This is week 2 of season 2. It is bolstering, entangling, fortified. But I was playing this last week, or I would have been playing this had I like discovered this is what I liked last week on Tyrannical Week as well. This may change as for the season goes, but this is what I'm playing in like 99% of situations I'm playing this. But I'll show, I have 3 other builds that you can definitely run. This one plays without Mongoose Bite, plays Raptor Strike instead. You can play this with Mongoose Bite. Very similar results. I think the Raptor Strike build is a little bit better in basically every situation. But we'll talk about that as I get further into this video. I'll go over that specific choice later on. And then you have a no CA build. So no Coordinated Assault. You basically play with no cooldown. Your biggest cooldown is 45 seconds with Fury of the Eagle. And this, just like the Coordinated Assault builds, have the Raptor Strike and Mongoose Bite builds. So if you're just looking for a TLDR, you can play any of these 4 and you'll be fine. I think the bigger the keys go, the better Coordinated Assault gets. The smaller the keys are, the better the no Coordinated Assault is. So that's it for the the short stuff. Let's get really into it. And we'll start with I'm going to do the class tree, and we'll go through pretty much every talent, and then we'll move over and we'll do the spec tree as well. Talk about what I like, what I don't like, and where there are a few like choice nodes in here that you don't have to take exactly what I'm taking, and there are situations where I would say other talents would be better. So in the class tree, obviously we have kill command. This is default. You'll have this all the time. We have concussive shot, which I don't think there's anything you can drop for this. This would be nice just having a range slow, but oftentimes in Mythic Plus, a single target slow is not as useful as some sort of AoE slow. We already have Tar Trap, which we'll talk about when we get there. We have Wing Clip for a single target slow if you really need it, and we have Harpoon, which is a 3-second route, which oftentimes is even more useful than a slow to give your tank space from something that's going to kill it on the next attack or something like that. So with that, I think concussive shot is a never take. Kill shot is an always take. This ends up being a large portion of our damage. With Coordinated Assault, it's still a very good button. Without Coordinated Assault, it just becomes a single target button instead of an AoE button. But this is an always take, never drop, because it just does great damage. Great execute spell. Trailblazer is something I wish we could take in a lot of these dungeons, especially with some of the runbacks currently. Looking at Halls of Infusion, if you go left side and you don't get the skip, even if you get the skip going right side, running back, if you wipe in the gauntlet at the end of that dungeon is very long. I wish we could take this, but I don't think we have the points. There's just way too many valuable talents. However, this is if you're just doing solo content and you're playing Survival Hunter, this is a great talent. I take this in like my questing build just for running around. Then we have Post Haste. This is massively useful, way more than I think people realize. This is a default take on all 3 Hunter specs, but Survival Hunter in particular, being in melee, this is super useful. Not just for the move speed. Obviously, we get 50% move speed. This is how you get your mobility, because you're going to be playing at probably about 100% move speed, maybe even less, depending on what embellishments you run. But the freement from snares is huge. There are so many spells in these dungeons right now or debuffs rather, that go out that are removed by snare removal. The big one being in Halls of Infusion, the Dragon's Deep Chill is a snare. So the huge dot you get after the big AoE goes out, you just remove by hitting disengage. Also, Curse of Stone in Uldaman, if you don't have a curse dispel in your group, that's a snare removal. There's a few others I'm not thinking of right now, but basically, if you ever get a debuff and you're not sure if you can remove it or not, just hit disengage and see what happens, because more often than not, or more often than you might think, you can remove spells or remove dangerous debuffs just by hitting disengage. Then we have Improved Kill Shot, which obviously with Kill Shot being a huge damage spell for us with Coordinated Assault and without, but specifically with Coordinated Assault, increasing the crit damage by 25% is an always take. This is a no choice. You take this all the time. Wilderness Medicine is a never take. Early on in the season, there was some stuff hitting pets that wasn't supposed to. It seems that they've fixed most of that. There's still some like fervent strike abilities, or even some like melee abilities, like things in Brackenhide, the crushing smash and bloody bite, for example, can target your pets, but it seems like they take reduced damage from them. I haven't had pet deaths to that very often. The only time you really see pet deaths is if your tank dies, and then your pet may pull threat or get some fervent strike tank spells while everybody else is running away. So this is a never take for that reason. You're not going to get much value out of this at all. This is, however, useful if you're just soloing and not in Mythic Plus. But in dungeons, can't take it. Muzzle's an always take. You need kick. You cannot show up. It also leads into three talents that I think are always takes as well. So muzzle is cannot think about this, just take it. Natural mending, this is extremely powerful. Exhilaration, I think Hunter's actually quite tanky this season. A lot of the damage is physical. We wear mail armor. We're good at surviving one-shots, and we have tools that we didn't always have as far as surviving, and natural mending is one of those. This brings the exil cooldown down like a minute and a half, depending on if you're in PI, if you're in Lust. Like, there's a lot of things that just give you more focus or give you more casts and bring this down pretty short. So this is always like, first instinct, you're scared, you take some damage you weren't sure about, slam exhilaration. This is the first button you hit when you're in danger in Mythic Plus, and this just makes it even stronger. Next we have Tar Trap. Not an insane talent, but it's a required take to get to Trank Shot, which I think is an always take. So it gives us a slow. It helps our team in that way. There's not a lot of situations where Tar Trap itself, because it's placed on the ground and not a debuff on enemies that you can just like apply. Not as useful as other slows, but can be useful. Main scenario is the Frog Boss in Halls of Infusion. This is very good there. It can be good on the Custodians and Ultiman as your tank's trying to run away from them, beating his ass. So you'll get some uses. A little bit helpful with kiting, but it's really not a great spell, but it leads to stuff that we need to take. Misdirection being the next one. This is an always take for sure. This is one of the things Hunter brings that's very valuable, whether it be from pulling mobs that your tank doesn't have to tag and you don't get threat on them, or making sure the tank has good threat when stuff groups up. So it's important to be aware of what the situation is when you're using your misdirect. Like on a pull, is it better for me to misdirect at the beginning to make sure, like while it's grouping, to make sure that, like, say these three mobs are coming from a different angle, he has threat on them by the time they get in, and then as they get into the pack, my tank will get threat, it'll be fine. Or if it's a pull, you're waiting until, all right, I gotta wait till everything's groups and then slam with all my cooldowns, I'm hitting misdirect and my tank's never losing threat. Usually it's the latter. Sometimes it's the help your tank group up mobs kind of thing. But this isn't always take. I don't think there's a situation where you don't take misdirect as survival. You'll see some Beast Mastery hunters not taking this because obviously as Beast Mastery, most of your damage is your pets. It's not coming from you. So your misdirect doesn't really do anything. It's very weak. So you'll see that situation sometimes, but survival I think takes it for sure 100% of the time. Survival of the fittest being an always take for sure. This is our major defensive cooldown. It's a 3-minute, 20% DR baseline, but we will empower it in our future talents, which we'll talk about in just a second here. This is huge for very big hits. Basically, if this is up, it's very unlikely that you die. 40% DR. It only lasts 6 seconds, but that usually covers most things. Things like bolstered enforcers in Freehold, the big shattering bellow cast that they added to them. These guys will get double bolster stacks in one of the pulls before the first boss pretty frequently, and this allows you to live that, whereas other players have to run like 50 yards away to try to outrange it or go line it somewhere. This lets you stand in and do damage and live that. Obviously there's other spells for this too, but that's a big one to think about. Then we have Trank Shot. Now there aren't an insane amount of useful purges, and there are other classes that are better at doing this, but it obviously brings a Soothe, which for some mobs is very good. Thinking about the Matrons and Underrot, they enrage all the mobs around them, and it increases their haste, which increases the animation of the frontal that the maggot casts in that pack. So being able to soothe that maggot is super helpful for people actually being able to dodge, because when it's enraged, the animation goes out and the frontal starts immediately. There is no reaction time. You either are in the frontal or you're not. So being able to soothe stuff like that is very good. And just various buffs throughout. Halls of Infusion, or Ultiman has some stuff to purge Freehold has some stuff with painful motivation. You don't want that buff to go on the Enforcer towards the end, but you do want to go on the rest of the pack to kill everything, or to help you kill everything. So just having a Magic, Dispel, and Enrage, very good. And I think this is an always take. I don't think, like, because your other option is to take Entrapment. I think this is too weak. So you go with Tranquilizing Shot here because you want to lead into Intim, which we'll talk about when we get there. So speaking of Entrapment, this is not good enough. Doesn't function like old Binding where it just doesn't break on damage. It's just a tiny root when Tar Trap's activated. You could maybe get some value on the Frog Boss and Halls of Infusion, but even that, Tar Trap's good enough in that situation. I think you never take this. Improved Traps. This is something you could consider taking in one situation, specifically in Freehold, for trapping the ad that spawns on the last boss. However, there should only be one overlap. If you're good about hitting your trap on cooldown, as soon as you can place your trap in the spot where the ad spawns, and you're good about tracking your trap cooldown, there should only be one singular ad during the whole fight that you don't have trap backup for, and for that you have Intimidation into Scatter Shot, so you can still handle that, or somebody else in your group. You can be like, hey guys, one time over this 4 minutes, like, please do this for me instead of making me trap, and it's fine. Otherwise, you can take care of every trap with the current cooldown, the baseline cooldown on Freezing Trap. So this is not insane. I tried it in Freehold. Really didn't notice a difference, so I would never take this. I would slot this into a never take spot. Next, we have our choice node here. I think it is an always take the 20% DR. I don't think the reduced cooldown for this only being a 20%, like this is only going to be a just under 2 minute cooldown, 20% DR. I don't think that's good enough. You want your button to be useful. 40% DR is huge. And there's other ways to live stuff, whether it be turtle, whether it's just making sure you're topped. In a lot of cases, many people pushing Mythic Plus are playing Dwarf, so you have that as an option for physical damage reduction and debuff removal, which is usually what's dangerous in most of these dungeons. So I think this is an always Nature's Endurance. You're welcome to try out Lone Survival if you want to. There may be some overlaps that I'll discover where like having that extra 2 seconds on the DR is very useful, but I have not noticed anything so far. And I am kind of on the lookout for stuff like that while I'm playing these dungeons. So I think you can safely slot into Nature's Endurance always, and be happy about that. Next, we have Born to be Wild. Now, this is, I think, an optional one. There's 2 points here, 2 utility points here that you can kind of swap around. Maybe we'll say 3 if you include camo, but this section here, which we'll talk about in a second. Born to be Wild, this is CDR on your aspects and on Survival of the Fittest. I think this is extremely good, and I wouldn't drop this anywhere. Just being able to turtle stuff, even when like tank dies, it's pretty likely you have threat. You're in melee, so you generate more threat than your ranged players. You do a lot of damage, a lot of massive AoE damage. And other melee classes like Rogue, for example, are going to be tricksing as well. Now, you are misdirecting, so a lot of that threat's going to the tank. But it's very likely if your tank dies, you have threat. More often than not, just being in melee. Especially if you're running 2 range, you're almost always going to have threat. So being able to turtle and just sit there with threat on everything and having that available more often is very useful, as well as having the immunity available more often on certain boss fights. Turtle is very useful. Thinking about Neltharis, it's very good. It's also very good for using the chains in Neltharis. Having a shorter cooldown on Turtle lets you do that more often without killing yourself. Now, you can just die and use the chains as well in that dungeon, but ideally you get to live. And it's the shorter cooldown Survival of Fizz. This ends up being a 2.4 minute rather than a 3 minute. So this is, I would never swap out of this, but we'll talk about where you could make changes later on. In just a second, we'll get to these. Then we look at Scare Beast. I have not seen a situation where this is worth the point. Maybe it would be nice sometimes, but it's just safe to say you're not going to take this ever. Improved Trank Shot has one specific use, and I'll show you what that use is. There is a build you can take where you drop your Serpent Sting points over here, and you just let Serpent Sting be applied, which is normally your green bomb is how you're applying Serpent Sting anyway. You're not hard casting many. So you drop these 2 points, and then you put a point here. put a point here, and you have to drop a point in one of these two, or in Tim. You can choose your utility stuff, or you can choose in Tim. Drop one of those points. We'll drop in Tim for now, and you take pet damage over here. So this is a theoretical higher damage and also very passive damage build to take, but it requires you losing either a CC or a defensive or a utility thing and not being able to hardcast Serpent Sting. I personally don't think this build is the move if you wanted to take two out of two serrated shots, because most of the damage is here. The pet damage is not very much. I would personally slot into, like, here, we would just not do that talent, and I would run something like this. But if you want to just not even think about Serpent Sting ever, you want to run and get the pet damage out here for a little bit of bonus damage, you can, and that's fine. That's the only situation you take it. I don't think it's worth. I would never personally run it, but I could see it being something some of you may be interested in. So figure mention it. Next we have Intimidation or High Explosive Trap. I think Intim is insanely valuable. I would never not take this. I get so much use out of this in so many different places. Nitharian's Lair specifically is huge. Niltharis, it's huge. Just having a single target stun. Uldaman, it's awesome. There's so many stops in there that you want it. It's awesome in Halls of Infusion. It can be awesome in... It's actually not insane in Brackenhide Hollow, but it can be good in Brackenhide Hollow. It's good in Freehold. It's good in Underrot. It's just having this available. It's a very long stun too. It's a 5-second stun. I would never drop this personally. It is an extra point that is a little bit difficult to take when you consider losing some utility stuff over here, but I think it's too valuable in Mythic Plus, and you won't catch me without it. So my recommendation is taking it. And then we have, this is, I think, maybe still highly debated. I don't think this is a debate at all, the choice note here between Scatter and Binding. I think new Binding is so bad that it's just never worth taking. There's maybe some situations you could make an argument for it. The one place I thought I was going to be able to use it was in Uldaman. There's a pull we do with 5 of the Custodians before the third boss, which are the mobs that have that stacking damage buff, and when you stun them, it resets their damage buff, and it makes them take more damage periodically. Now, I was like, oh cool, Binding will be good there, so I can stun all 5 instead of just having a single target stun. Great. So the way this spell is coded is so jacked up since they changed it from the old route that it stuns them, but it doesn't remove the buff, nor does it apply the debuff that makes them take more damage. So Binding is somehow coded to be a stun, but also not a stun. So it doesn't even do the one thing that I thought it would be great for in this dungeon pool. And thus, I think just having another on-demand single target stop is massively useful. It's just so good. There's so many places. Maggots in Underrot, being able to stop them. Hail of Stones in Uldaman. Stopping containment beams in Halls of Infusion. Just anything you think of. Just little stuff that, oh, we don't have a kick for this? I can stop it with Scatter instead. Now, it does remove dots, so it's a damage loss, but it's not like... Just forget that part of it exists, as far as I'm concerned. If you need the stop, you use Scatter, and you don't think any further than that. So I take this in every dungeon. I don't take Binding anywhere. Maybe I'll come back to this and try some other stuff out, but I think for now you're safe to just run Scatter everywhere. Next, we have one of our 4 talents that are... You're choosing 5 out of these 7 points, basically. You have Rejuvenating Wind. Now this I've swapped into as my keys have gotten bigger. Previously, I had the 2 points in Pathfinding just because I like moving faster. It's more fun. And if you don't need this, you don't need this. However, this is massive defensive talent. 8% max health, just baseline for Hunter. On top of, you can run a tank pet for another, was it another 6%? Something like that you have when your tank pet's out. You just have, in some cases, 100k more health than other DPS at similar item level. So this is too good not to take if you're ever worried about dying. It also makes your exhilaration better. So on any rot fight, adding a little bit of 16% more max health. Because a lot of times you'll just be using, for example, third boss in Halls of Infusion, the Ice Glacier boss that just has massive ticking damage all the time. Or on a boss like the second boss in Vortex Pinnacle, just massive ticking damage. Just sending this early and often, as soon as you'll get full value out of this, just send it, and it lets your healer hit somebody else, and then a minute and a half later, you can send it again. Plus, the Rejuvenating Wind is a huge amount of value and helps a lot on those fights. So I think this talent, when you're getting into keys that are actually difficult for you, more so than just like, I'm just playing the game, this is fun, I'm walking through the dungeon, but I don't really need the throughput. Like, we're going to time the key or we're going to kill the boss, regardless of what talents I'm using. You don't need it. But when you start getting into the more challenging stuff, as your keys get higher, whatever that level is for you, this becomes very good. And I won't drop this ever, pretty much now. Now that we're at the point where I'm into like 23, 24s, no way am I ever not taking this. Next, we have camo, which for me is an auto take. There's just things you can do, or getting back from a wipe that you skipped something and your priest isn't here to mind soothe, or your rogue isn't here to shroud or something. Being able to use this, especially if you are an engineer and you have like goblin jumper cables and eventually NGB res, as we start getting our crafted stuff, being able to just stealth through stuff and then whether it be res somebody or just get back to a pack that your team is still fighting. I think this is just too much potential value, too much key saving potential value, where instead of everybody having to run back and it's a huge deal, or you have to kill a pack that you didn't want to kill because you don't have the skips for it anymore, you being able to just stealth through and get a res or like some sort of recovery off could save like 2 to 3 minutes on a key sometimes. So I think this is just too good not to take for 1 point. Sentinel Owl and the 2 with it, we'll talk about these together. You're probably always taking Sentinel's Protection if you're going to put 2 points over here. I think this is a never taken Mythic Plus, though. This is... Who cares about this? There's very few times you're aligning and you're like, oh man, I wish I could hit this boss still. There's like maybe some stuff in Ultiman, but you lose maybe a global for the Thunderous Clap mobs, the big golems, by line of sighting. Very infrequent that part of this would be good. So then the value becomes the Party Leech. The problem is that 5% Party Leech is like, who cares about this? This is not good. on a pack, say you're doing 200k DPS on a pack. 5% leech is 10k HPS to you, which is not a lot. And any time where 10k HPS would be useful would be on like a single target rot fight that you're just slowly bleeding out. But on those fights, you're not doing 200k DPS. You're doing 100k DPS. So now it becomes 5k HPS, not very strong. And it's not up all the time. Like, it's not, you don't have here, let me drop 12 seconds of healing yourself for 5k a second. Like, it's just numerically it is too weak. And there are the situations where you would want the leech, where it would be useful, are situations where you are typically doing low damage. So it's not great. Now, not to say I run leech pet in pretty much every dungeon. The 10% leech that you have all the time is valuable for sure on those big pulls, but 5% is half of it, and it's just not long enough to warrant the talents. There's also, like, you don't lose as much for running a tank pet or running a leech pet versus moving 2 talents over somewhere else. So I think these are trap. I actually had a discussion with somebody on stream yesterday, 2 days ago, about this, and we kind of like talked through how, like, oh, it sounded and felt like it was good, but now that we're like looking at the actual math, like, man, it actually didn't do anything. so I would avoid those talents. You will see them taken in raid just because you don't want to take the utility stuff. So it's like a might as well. Next we have Binding Shackles. I think this sucks. It's very infrequent that the mobs you CC are attacking you after you're done CCing them. So you can go ahead and skip this for sure. I would never take this unless you're, I don't know, you just decide I'm going to take this instead of Improved Trank Shot to get over to Beastmaster. Like, I guess you could find a way to get Beastmaster like that if you're trying to take this. I don't think this talent is great. Your pet doesn't do that much damage, so I wouldn't take it anyway. But anyways, moving on to Hunter's Avoidance versus Roar of Sacrifice. PvE content, you're taking Hunter's Avoidance every time. You are never taking Roar of Sacrifice. It is very infrequent that you're crit by things. I mean, you can be. Some mobs will crit you with melees, but that's if mobs are critting you with melees, you got bigger problems than the fact that you don't have Roar of Sacrifice. And 6% avoidance is insane. Another one of the reasons that I think Hunter is a little bit tankier than people realize. I feel like I am safe in every dungeon. I do not feel in danger at all in any situation, especially compared to my party members. And I play with a rogue pretty frequently, and he expresses that he does not feel safe on a lot of these pulls. So somehow we found a place where, like, Hunter is in general in Mythic Plus tankier than Rogue, which is crazy to me. But yeah, I just feel very, especially now that I've gone Dwarf, which Obviously, that's something I'm not expecting everybody to do, and does add a lot of safety. But I feel like Hunter is awesome right now as far as surviving stuff, and this is a huge part of it. Most of the stuff that's going to kill you is affected by avoidance, and this on top of whatever avoidance you get in your gear as well, if you get lucky with stuff, is huge. It's just 6% DR all the time. Then we get into pathfinding. This is the talent I wish I could take, but I just can't anymore. It's part of this package of 7 talents where you get to pick 5 points, and I think these top 5 are the 5. However, if you're doing keys where you're not worried about dying, take the pathfinding, man. 6% move speed is awesome. The game just feels better when you're faster. It's not like generally going to be better for any specific reason, but we're not that far removed from, I don't know if anybody played back in, I guess it would have been WoD would have been the last time where there were boot enchants every expansion, and one of the enchants had more stats, and the other one had stats and move speed. And every single person just took the stats and move speed. You took the DPS, the slight DPS loss, to take a little bit of move speed, because usually that turned into a DPS gain because you were able to move out of mechanics faster, get more casts off, be in proper positioning more often. So if you can take this, which is probably even up to like 20 keys, this is probably fine. Pushing past 20, you probably start wanting to take Rejuvenating Wind. Also kind of depends on how much you trust the healer you're playing with and how much you trust yourself to not stand in shit. But if I could take Pathfinding, I would. So do with that information what you will. Now we have Beastmaster. I showed the build where you could take this. I think this is just not good. I'll show you here. Pet damage is Daniel does 7% of my damage, not even. This isn't a freehold I did last night. Last key I did last night was a freehold, and it's just like, you're going to buff this damage by 3%. You're not even going to notice you have this talent. So I don't think this is ever worth taking. You can mess around with the build, like I said, with the serrated shots and drop in both these Serpent Stings, but I think you would just drop the last point and take serrated shots instead of going all out for Beastmaster, because it messes with what you want to do up here. So, does not have my endorsement. Next, we have Keen Eyesight. This is an always take. 4% crit chance. Turns into usually about 4% damage. And it unlocks all your other good stuff. So this is you don't think about this, you take this every single time. Then we have Master Marksman. Again, this is an always take. This empowers your crits to do more bleed damage, has synergy with serrated shots, which we'll talk about, and just basically makes your crits do 15% more damage because they're causing a bleed afterwards. So this is an always take for sure. Next, we have the Kill Command traits over here. These are Beast Mastery specific. I know we have Kill Command, and it sounds like it might be nice to have 2 charges, but the way the class plays right now, you don't need it. You're very infrequently dry on Kill Command charges, or just dry on like stuff to do. It's very, very rare that you end up with stuff to do, to the point where oftentimes you're canceling like Fury of the Eagle cast to do other stuff. So having the second charge of Kill Command is not great, and then Kill Command doesn't do enough damage to want to play Killer Instinct. So you don't take Improved Kill Command, and you don't take the nodes underneath it, because it's just not how the spec functions right now. Now, maybe even future tiers, things could change. We'll be more Kill Command reliant, and we want to slam out the old pet bites, but for now, you can ignore this part of the tree. Then we have Serrated Shots, which we talked about. At least 1 point of this, I think, is an always take. You can consider dropping 2 points and drop in this stuff, which I'll talk about when we get to the Hydra's Bite Latent Poison Injector decision. I'm going to mess with 2 points in this for a little bit the next couple weeks and kind of see how I feel. But for right now, I think this overall is the move. But again, if you just like, I don't feel like thinking about Serpent Sting, I'm just putting a point over here. It's good. Because especially if you're playing Coordinated Assault, I wouldn't put 2 points in here if you're playing a no Coordinated Assault build. Because a lot of the Coordinated Assault is your kill shots apply a bleed. So this buffs this ability even more. So we'll talk about that more when we get to the Coordinated Assault. But I would, for now, just slot 1 point. There you go. Arctic Bola, this is just passive damage when you Raptor Strike. You take this mostly to get Explosive Shot, but again, it's just passive damage on single target. It's fine. It's not going to do much in AoE. It's just a damage boost, but it is an always take in every Mythic Plus dungeon. I don't think there's an option at all. Serpent Sting, for me, this is an always take. Actually, we'll talk about Hydra's Bite in here with this right now. So there's a lot of debate, I guess, or curiosity in the Hydra's Bite versus Latent Poison Injectors. I'll refer to this as LPI because it used to be called, this is an old Azurite trait from BFA. that was called latent poison injectors, and also was a legendary in Shadowlands. So I see poison injection. You guys may think I'm crazy, but I call it LPI. So when I'm if I say LPI, this is what I'm talking about. Just a disclaimer here. So the reason I think Hydra's Bite has more value than LPI, even though on single targets about 1% behind, which typically means on priority targets it's going to be a little bit behind too. So like whatever the main target you're trying to kill, Hydra's Bite will do a little bit less damage. However, there are a lot of situations where Serpent Sting becomes a really valuable global to press in Mythic Plus. And that's because there's no way to really simulate or quantify how packs group up together and like what you're doing while a pack groups up. Typically, you're a little bit worried about threat while a pack's grouping up. Your tank probably has one global into something, and he runs by it and he goes to tag something else so he can pull like a group together. Because it's not always you're just like, here's the 5 mobs in front of us, let's walk into them. You're combining stuff, you're pulling one guy from over here, stuff from over here, and you want stuff to group together. So in that situation, if you're holding your misdirect for when the pack groups, you don't want to just start slamming on mobs, like slamming out Raptor Strikes or Mongoose Bites or throwing bombs or butcheries that eventually that maybe put you behind on your bomb charges when the pack's actually grouped and you'll get full value out of them. So Serpent Sting ends up being a very low threat button that you're just able to do that ends up being free damage later in the pack while stuff's grouping. Now, this isn't a button like during combat, like once the pack's grouped, you're not hitting Serpent Sting. It's rare that you're hitting it. Maybe there's some places in Freehold where everything kind of has equal value. You're trying to kill everything at the same time. There's not really priority mobs where you'll hit Serpent Sting over Raptor Strikes just to make sure everything's covered. It does a little bit more damage overall, ensuring that happens and empowering your green bombs later. But and with Hydra's Bite hitting all 3, it ends up being a better button. But most of the time, this is a grouping button. This is not I hit this in combat. And you could say you can hit that Serpent Sting with LPI as well, and you could. That's true. You could be casting singular Serpent Stings as stuff's grouping up. It's unlikely you cover every mob, and most of those mobs that you're covering with Serpent Sting, you're gonna not get value out of the LPI because you're not gonna. It's not like you're not really tabbing through to pop these stacks. You have to hit the bomb with a Mongoose Bite or Raptor Strike to consume this damage. Otherwise, the talent didn't do anything, right? It's not often that you're doing that. So instead, taking the passive 20% damage on all the mobs that do get Serpent Stinged ends up working out to more overall damage. Now, this is doesn't always make the dungeon faster. It's important to recognize doing more damage does not always make the dungeon faster, which is the goal of Mythic Plus. Well, sometimes it's the goal of Mythic Plus. A lot of the time, it's like, I want to flex how much damage I'm doing, which in this case, Hydra's Bite is, I think, always better. But if your goal is to complete the dungeon faster, I think Hydra's Bite is often better as well. Because not every pack is like, let's kill this one guy first for sure. And in the same vein, not every pack is, my damage to the other mobs doesn't matter. It often does. And in that case, Hydra's Bite ends up being the better choice. However, this is a choice thing. You can take LPI. There are some dungeons LPI is probably better. Thinking about stuff like Vortex Pinnacle is a lot lower target count. And it also has priority mobs. Like you fight a dragon by itself twice sometimes. The 3 bosses are the big deals of that dungeon. So having the single target damage there is useful. Tyrannical Week, maybe I'll reconsider. But for now, I think Hydra's Bite is better in every dungeon. But this is something I would encourage you guys to play with and kind of have fun and check your details at the end and be like, oh man, I lost this much Serpent Sting damage, but I gained X. And then you can see what it does damage to, right? In details, if you scroll over this, you can kind of take a look at your damage done. Like for example, Serpent Sting, I can look through and find the bosses. Harlan's Sweet, my Serpent Sting did 1.69 million damage to the boss. And then, okay, if I reduce 20% of that, what would it have been? And then you do another dungeon and you try LPI and you see how much damage that did to the boss and kind of gauge like, okay, how much am I really gaining here versus how much am I gaining on other mobs? So if you're a turbo nerd like I am, and I think most Mythic Plusers are with like where their damage is done, that's a fun thing to do. Like in between dungeons, you just swap and take a look at where the damage comes from. But let's finish this up. I know this class section has taken a long time. We got 3 more talents to talk about. Steel Trap is just don't take this. It's not useful enough. There's no real situation where you'd want to Steel Trap something instead of Freezing Trap it, or stun it, or scattershot it. This is just not, and it doesn't do enough damage. Now, if this did like huge single target damage, maybe you take it, but it's just not, you can ignore this for sure. Death Chakram is an always take, and Explosive Shot always take. They're just massive damage. This increases your AoE damage by a lot. It applies a 10% damage taken debuff to all the mobs it hits for 10 seconds. So this is synced up with your cooldowns, and it owns. And Explosive Shot just does huge AoE damage. It's just a button that you hit, and then it does 5% of your damage, and that's it. You don't think about it any more than that. Slam this baby on cooldown if there's more than one mob. If there's just one mob, there's other stuff that is a better cast sometimes, like mostly your bombs and kill shots, but Explosive Shot's also used on single target. So that's the class tree. I think the important takeaway is that you have these 5 points out of 7 that you're choosing from, and most of the others I think are kind of set in stone. The talent tree is generally not flexible in that sense, which I think is okay. I think you're not missing out on stuff that is super rough to miss out on. And then obviously you have your choice down here of LPI and Hydra's Bite, which I would encourage you guys to play around with and see what you like. So now let's get into the class tree, or the spec tree, where again, I don't think there's too much choice, which for some people I guess comes off as not a great talent tree. For me, I think the survival spec plays in a way that's pretty fun and engaging right now, so I'm not really upset about it. Now, if there were talents I was like, man, I wish I could take that, maybe I'd have a different opinion, but I think generally this is pretty good right now. So at the top we have Raptor Strike, which this is just your single target spell. You're taking this all the time. You can turn this into Mongoose Bite, or you can play with Raptor Strike. I prefer Raptor Strike, but we'll talk about that when we get down here. Next, we have Wildfire Bombs. This is going to be the most damage that you do once you get 4-piece. Now, it's worth mentioning maybe as we go through this, this build is playable both with and without 4-piece. You can play this. I was playing the same build before I got my 4-piece when I was using the old one. I would say that, if anything, Swinging Spear might actually be more valuable with old 4-piece than it is now, which we'll talk about when we get there. But you can also play no CA. I think the no CA build, or no coordinated assault build, is actually a bit better without the new 4-piece. And then once you get the new 4-piece, I like the coordinated assault build a lot. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about this. Like, how much tier you have is not necessarily going to change what you play here. You can play both builds with and without tier. They'll play a little bit different just with how the tier functions, but it's the same thing. So bombs become your top damage by a mile once you get the 4-piece of the new tier. So obviously we're taking this. Next we have Tip of the Spear. This is just, we don't think about this at all. This is not something you play around. When you kill command, it just makes your next Raptor Strike or Mongoose Bite do more damage. That's it. It's just a passive increase. Do not think about this. You don't even need to track it. Just hit your buttons when you should be hitting your buttons. Don't think about this buff. 2 points in there for sure. Next we have Ferocity, which unlocks a lot of points. The 10% pet damage, again, is pretty minuscule, as we talked about with Beastmaster, but it unlocks good points. It's a good one-pointer, and it takes us where we want to go. Flanker's Advantage, this is a maybe take. There's 3 points in here that are options, and that being Flanker's Advantage, Aspect of the Eagle, in terms of engagement. Those are like your 3. I would never take Energetic Ally, but that's like your 8th point is going to be one of these 3 things. For me, I don't think this is the best. There's a world where this is more single target damage. I think in most situations, on paper, terms of engagement is going to be more single target damage, but I think in most situations, Flanker's Advantage actually does work out to being more. For the reason being that, let's just talk about Harpoon in terms of engagement with this. We'll talk about these 3 together because they are important to think about all 3. So Harpoon is our gap closer, 30-second cooldown baseline, roots mobs for 3 seconds, pulls you towards them. Terms of engagement reduces the cooldown down to 20 seconds, makes it deal damage, and generates focus. And then also adds the reset whenever a mob dies. Now, this is not, you do not need the last hit. It's just a mob dies that you were in combat with. At least from what I've noticed in Mythic Plus, I haven't seen any mobs that haven't functioned this way. You get the Harpoon reset. So the cooldown on this ends up being very low, and you can use it very often. And there are some use cases, there's one specifically I'll talk about in a second, that is very good of having the cooldown reset. So If you use this on cooldown on a single target fight every 20 seconds, because it's off global, you can do it in between a global cooldown. You dip out or you hit disengage and you harpoon back in. You get the damage and you get 20 more focus over the next 10 seconds. Technically, it ends up being more damage than Flanker's Advantage. However, the situations where you're just using harpoon for damage are infrequent. It's very useful in Mythic Plus. Specifically, the first example that comes to mind is this week with Entangling. Being able to, Entangling pops out, disengage out, harpoon in, it's gone. The whole affix is over. You just handled it off global in under a second. You didn't have to think about it. And having this basically always off cooldown makes it so you're not playing an affix. Like it's just gone. There's no thinking about what you're doing. It's just great for mobility, also moving around dungeon as things die. And on boss fights, it's oftentimes your positioning can be very specific in some places where you don't want to be using harpoon on cooldown, or you want it for a specific gap closer. So in those situations, Flanker's Advantage often does become more single target damage. But it's less utility, and I think that the damage increase is it's definitely less than 1%. It might be less than 1/10 of percent is what it actually works out to. So I'm not a fan of this. There are some other guys that have been playing it. A hunter named Banchers specifically, who turned me on to playing Raptor Strike instead of Mongoose play. So shout out to Banchers for that. I love this build now that we talked about it. But I think he is playing Flanker's Advantage right now. Or last time we talked, he was playing Flanker's Advantage instead of Terms of Engagement. So these are definitely, I would try both. See how much you miss Terms of Engagement and the shorter cooldown on a harpoon, and go for it. But my recommendation is that the last point that you could swap in here is Aspect of the Eagle. This obviously makes your Raptor Strike have huge range. Your range character, because Raptor Strike is really the one thing that is melee limited for the most part, right? Your kill command is ranged, your bombs are ranged, Serpent Sting's ranged. If you're hardcasting it, you shouldn't be hardcasting it. Don't do it. But Raptor Strike is your focus dump that allows you to continue to be efficient with your rotation while being at ranged. However, there's not really that many situations in Mythic Plus where you have to be off the boss for a significant amount of time. I thought this was going to be maybe good in Underrot second boss, for example, or Underrot third boss when you're going to drop your upheaval to clear mushrooms. You can still attack the boss. During the tantrum, you can still attack the boss. However, in practice, it's not really the cooldown's too long to get enough real good use out of it, at least for my opinion. And the situation where you would use it, especially second boss Underrot, a lot of times it's better for the hunter to just be the one that follows the boss. You clean up a little bit of the ticks during the tantrum that drop where you were. The boss runs away. You have this huge gap closer and harpoon to get to the boss, and then another disengage to clean up stuff on the other side of the room. So you're not getting eagle value because you're following the boss. You're on the boss cleaning up the stuff on the ground for most times. So keep an eye out, I guess, for situations. We're still week 2. I'm not saying this is set in stone at all, that this isn't worth it. But I haven't found any situations where I was like, man, I really would like to sacrifice 10 seconds of CDR on Harpoon for Aspect of the Eagle in this dungeon. That would be awesome. So for now, from me at least, this is a no take, and I would consider trying these two, leaning towards Terms of Engagement. So I want to talk about the one situation while we're here. I know this is kind of going a little bit too in depth over a utility spell, a gap closer, but specifically, I would pay attention to the cooldown of your Harpoon in Underrot, in the second boss room, in Kragmaw's room, where you're fighting Bloodswarmers, the Globs, you have the Flowers, and the Maggots. Most of the time, the way you pull that dungeon, the way you pull that room, is you pull a bunch of stuff. There's one Bloodswarmer, you kill the Bloodswarmer, and then you pull another Bloodswarmer, and you start moving along. You just chain the whole room all the way around. You're just always fighting one Bloodswarmer at a time. Because it's the most dangerous mob. It's the only way you really die in there. Obviously, frontals could go off, but usually stops on that are easy. The only way you die is somebody just gets owned by getting fixated by the Bloodswarmer. So how do you fix that? You make it so the Bloodswarmer doesn't move. We have Intimidation to help that as well. So somebody gets fixated, 5 seconds of the fixate is covered by Intimidation. Then you can step out of melee and Harpoon in. The mob's now rooted. So if the mob is not in melee range, because you want to keep this in the pack, right? So you have somebody kiting a fixate mob, but trying to keep the fixate mob in the pack that you're fighting so that you're getting efficient damage on everything. So Having a 3-second root that doesn't break on damage, which is what Harpoon is insanely valuable for that. And then if anything dies, because you're chaining, so it's not often that like just because you're trying to kill the Bloodswarmer doesn't mean other mobs aren't dying. And as soon as another mob dies, you can root it. You can step out of melee and root it again, and root it again, and root it again. And this becomes like this. I know I'm focusing on one mob, but a lot of the times the most dangerous part of Underrot, at least in my opinion, is those mobs. There's not really much else that kills you, at least on Fortified Week. It's usually going to be the Bloodswarmers or the mobs at the end with the frontals that you're fighting on worms. But having a talent that basically removes, or at least pseudo removes, the most difficult part of a dungeon from the dungeon is insane. So Underrot specifically, I would always take this. There's other places where it's useful. I take it everywhere. I think it's better than this, but you're welcome to try out Flanker's Advantage. All right, end rant on Harpoon. I love this spell. It's the coolest part about Survival. If they took Harpoon away, I would no longer play the spec. So next we have Energetic Ally. This is not good enough. It's just a passive 10% more focus. It's not. It's just a never take. The other traits in here are just better. So you can't take it. Next we have Bloodseeker. This is just makes your kill command do more damage and makes you have more attack speed, which previously was like, who cares that I have more attack speed? I don't like, there's no interaction with that for Survival. But with the new talent Lunge, attack speed is very good now. All of our attack speeds are 1 second, or all of our auto attacks are 1 second of CDR and Wildfire Bombs. So the synergy between Bloodseeker and this is very good. I will come back to Bloodseeker and talk about it more when we get to Fury of the Eagle, because there is an important interaction there. But otherwise, this is an auto take. It unlocks talents that we must take. So you have to take this, and it's good on its own. It's just passive damage. You can kind of spread kill commands if you want to do a little bit more damage. But usually the bleeding that is applied is from Butchery applying Blue Bomb bleed, so you don't really have to worry about spamming. Well, not spamming, but like tab targeting kill commands. You're gonna get bleeds out there from the internal bleeding effect from your Blue Bomb, Shrapnel Bomb. I just call them by the colors. It's Shrapnel though. And its interaction with Butchery now. So just take it, forget about it. There you go. Next row, we have Wildfire Bomb has 2 charges. Initial damage deals 50% increased damage. This is a huge damage buff for us, the extra charge in particular. You always take this for sure. Bombs are most of your damage. If it buffs bombs, you take the talent pretty much. Talked about Lunge here. This also gives us range. Again, this is a huge part of why Survival Hunter feels very safe in Mythic Plus right now. Having the additional 3-yard range is huge. You can walk away from some mechanics and still, like for example, the Rage Storms, what are they called? Like Heckling Hide, or no, War Scourges in Brackenhide. Big Lieutenant mobs spin around in circles. If you don't want to, you don't even have to soothe the Blade Storm. You can just stand there and continue to hit all the mobs full uptime because you have increased range. Now, you have other melee. Maybe it's helpful for them to soothe, but this is massively useful. Abuse it. There's so many situations where you get so much value out of this, and you probably don't even realize it until you play another melee class. But Lunge, this talent's awesome. I'm so glad that this talent exists now. Butchery versus Carve is just Butchery. It's just always Butchery. It does so much more damage. Has the same effect as Carve as far as CDR goes. But it's also an AoE around you, so it's way easier to get value and hit every mob. Instead of just being a frontal, like a little cone in front of you, it hits everything around your character. It does more damage. The charge system requires a little bit of getting used to, that you don't want to overspend or underspend your charges. You want to make sure you kind of always have them recharging and you're getting full value out of them for the CDR and your bombs. And it just does way more damage than Butchery. Especially with the new tier set, now that you have so many more bombs to cast, a way shorter cooldown on bomb, just the damage of Butchery is just so much more than Carve, even without getting better CDR from the AoE. It's an always take for sure. And with that, you take a Frenzy Strike. This is what gives it the CDR. So you're always taking these two together. Otherwise, this is, I mean, it'd still be okay, but the CDR is really where you're taking it. Now we have our Mongoose Bite point. And this coincides, we'll take a moment to talk about our 2 out of 4 choice here. So you're either taking Mongoose Bite and, we'll show you here, you're either taking Mongoose Bite and Intense Focus, or you're taking Sweeping Spear. Now, Mongoose Bite, Intense Focus, on paper, is more single target damage when you're just fighting a single target mob on paper. Assuming you're playing your Mongoose Fury windows correctly, perfectly, there's no like, oh man, I gotta waste a global here in a Mongoose Fury window on doing some weird CC stuff, or like I gotta go res somebody, or I gotta hit Exhilaration here, or I gotta hit Turtle here, or like, you know what I mean, something like that, which often comes up in Mythic Plus. Mythic Plus I think is a lot less. It's still scripted, but it's a bit more volatile than raid bosses, because I think it's mostly just like brain decay, I guess. Like you fight a boss in raid, it's 5 minutes. All right, I know exactly where I'm doing this, these 5 minutes in raid. Mythic Plus, it's a longer thing. It's harder to have like the stamina to keep your brain focused for a 30-minute dungeon than it is a 5-minute boss fight. So with that, a lot of times you don't hit your buttons in the exact same spot every time. So it's a little bit more difficult to plan out Mongoose Fury windows and get the value out of that. Whereas Sweeping Spear, my Raptor Strike does more damage, and it buffs carves, so it's more AoE damage for sure than these other two. And with the new 4 set, you are hitting Mongoose Bite in AoE, or Raptor Strike in this case, much less often, because you have more CDR in your bombs, and you're just casting bomb more often. So to put this in perspective, because I want to talk about a little bit of target swapping as well, we see with this talent in Raptor Strike, my Raptor Strike does 38,966 damage. Now, if we swap to Mongoose Bite, we'll pull up the calculator here just to make this point even stronger. So we had 38,966, right? 38,966 was the Raptor Strike baseline. Mongoose Bite at no stacks is 28,807. So 28,807 times 1.15, because you gain 15% each time you use one, is 33,128. Now let's try, so that's at 1 stack, it's still less than Mongoose Bite, right? So at 2 stacks, 37,449. 2 stacks, it's still worse than still worse than Raptor Strike. Now we have at 3 stacks, 28,807 times 1.45 for 45% bonus. Now we're at 41,700. So it takes till your 3rd stack. So first Mongoose Bite has no stacks. Second has 1. Third has 2. Your 4th Mongoose Bite in a Mongoose Fury window is the first one that does more damage than Raptor Strike. But at this point, you still haven't done more damage. Your 4 Raptor Strikes still would have done more total damage than those 4 Mongoose Bites, assuming you're starting a fresh Mongoose Fury window. This is important on some bosses, I'm going to drop the talent window just to pull up these bosses, because I think this point is very important to make, and is the reason why I decided to swap to the Raptor Strike build as opposed to Mongoose Bite. So target swapping has been very important in a lot of these dungeons as far as making sure you get full value in a short window, and the main culprit of this is the Decatriarch Wrath-Eye, which is the last boss of Brackenhide Hollow. The timer on this dungeon is pretty lenient. Most of the other bosses, or most of the other stuff you do, with the exception of maybe the first boss, is not super difficult. It's not mechanically that taxing, and the timer is pretty lenient if you have a good route. The pass-fail mechanic of this dungeon is, can you kill every totem on this boss? Every totem that spawns, can you kill every totem? And I think in this situation specifically, Raptor Strike is much better, because it is very difficult without turbo griefing your damage on the boss, which again, you can't, if you're in a challenging level as key, you can't just do 50k on total on the boss. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to go walk into a 24 Brackenhide with Mongoose Bite and do a total of 50k DPS on the last boss, and it's okay, just because I was able to kill the totems. Because that's what we would require to make sure you go into each totem with like a 5-stack Mongoose Fury window ready to slam out huge Mongoose Bites to kill it, right? So in that situation, being able to not fully interrupt the way you play your class and still having good target swapping on this like 6-second window that you need to get casts off, Raptor Strike becomes better. There are other examples of this too. Vortex Pinnacle, again on this last boss. This is a little bit more lenient because this ad lives for a lot longer. It's not just a 6-second window. It's usually 10 to 15 seconds, maybe 20, depending on your group's damage, as far as target swapping goes. But again, your Mongoose Fury windows are less sick now because you're casting your bombs. You're not capping on bombs. You're casting kill commands in there to refresh your the 4-piece debuff, which takes casts away from Mongoose Fury or from Mongoose Bite in valuable Mongoose Fury windows. Which means oftentimes you'll get to a 4 or 5 stack, but you're not really abusing that 5 stack because you just have better stuff to press, right? That your focus is just being spent elsewhere, or your globals are being spent elsewhere. So you're getting less value out of Mongoose Bite in that situation anyway. Some other target swapping, Oldaman's second boss, Bromach, swapping to the totem. Again, this is kind of a pass-fail part of the dungeon. The rest of the dungeon is not insanely difficult comparatively. Passing the damage check on the totems here tends to be how you complete this dungeon in time. It's kind of the pass-fail, the hardest part of the dungeon. And for this situation, Raptor Strike, again, I think is better. Oftentimes, you're hitting Carve a lot on this boss as opposed to Mongoose Bite before the totem spawns because you have adds up, you're trying to cast more bombs, you're trying to set yourself up to have a full set of bombs going into the totem, and then your empty globals in between bombs can be spent on your Raptor Strikes to kill a totem very quickly while you're waiting on your butchery charges to come back up. So again, this is a situation I think Mongoose Bite is worse here. And those are the three situations, the three major situations at least, with target swapping that are pass-fail parts of the dungeon where Raptor Strike, in my opinion, is just straight up better, which has led me to swapping these points of Mongoose Bite and Intense Focus out for a Sweeping Spear. It should also be more AoE damage. You will do more AoE damage overall with this while having the ability to target swap to a priority target more efficiently in most cases without good Mongoose Fury setup windows than the other. So I think there's going to be a lot of discourse about these 2 or these 4 points that you have to pick 2 of over the next, couple weeks, maybe the rest of the season. People will be talking about it. That's where I stand right now. I think you can always take this. It also makes it, there's something to be said for removing difficulty from your class. I know a lot of people like to be like, man, like, I'm going to take the hard talents that are technically a 0.5% increase, and I'm going to play the game that way, and I'm going to own, and I'm just going to do so much damage, you'll see. We play World of Warcraft, man. I talked about this a little bit yesterday on stream. We play World of Warcraft mostly because we're not insane at video games, right? Like, this is not, comparatively, it is a less skill-based and more knowledge-based video game than anything. So executing more complicated rotations is often not in the cards for for all of us that play WoW. So being able to remove brain globals, as I like to call it, I refer to, like, you have your global in-game, but then there's also, like, you have a brain global. There's a GCD on what you can think about. It's a little bit faster for most people than the 1.5 seconds in WoW, but it's worth trying to remove those where you can. And Raptor Strike is don't think about it ever. Mongoose Bite is think about it. So if you can get a very minor gain, and to be honest, to be clear, I don't think there is an actual gain in damage or usefulness for Mongoose Bite right now. I think it is only increased difficulty in Mythic Plus, and I think you will get more damage as Sweeping Spear, even if you play Mongoose Bite correctly in most dungeons. So I am hard backing Sweeping Spear and hard against Intense Focus and Mongoose Bite, but I would encourage you to try both and see if you like them, because a lot of people, like, I was really excited Mongoose Bite was back in the tree at first, because I've been away for a year. I hadn't played the first season, but I've played Survival forever, going back to Burning Crusade. Like, I've always, like, at least part of the expansion I will focus on my Hunter and I will play Survival Hunter and just have fun. So Mongoose Bite was a fun part of how the class played in Legion and a little bit in BFA. I didn't play it as much in BFA, but in Legion it was a fun part of how the class played, and the Fury of the Eagle synergy, which doesn't exist anymore. But anyways, I was excited to be able to take the button again, because it was just untalentable for a long time, at least in Mythic Plus. So I thought it was cool. But after playing with both, I will concede defeat and play Raptor Strike from now on, I think, unless something changes with the tuning. So that's our little rant on that. Give me a second. We'll talk about the rest of the talents. Next we have, we're getting into the final section here, or the bottom half. Talked about Intense Focus. You can take this if you like with that combo, but not a huge fan. We have Improved Wildfire Bomb. Again, anything that buffs bombs we are taking. It is the majority of our damage right now. This thing owns. Then we have Flanking Strike and Tactical Advantage, which if you are playing no Coordinated Assault, you will take these. These are good talents. They're just, I think the Coordinated Assault package is better. But they're good talents. Flanking Strike is something to be aware of. It is a gap closer as well. So on some bosses where you don't want it to gap close, you want to make sure you're right up against the boss's hitbox before you use it. It does good damage by itself. It generates a ton of focus. Cool ability. But more importantly, it leads into Tactical Advantage, which is 8% bomb damage, which is a lot of where you're getting the value in no Coordinated Assault is your bombs are just baseline doing way more damage. Coordinated Assault lets you cast a bit more bombs inside your cooldowns, but all the time you're just doing 8% more damage with your bombs with Tactical Advantage. So if you're playing no Coordinated Assault, I think this is the package you should play. At the very end, I will talk about another package. So if you're interested in like, oh, I'm gonna play no Coordinated Assault, but what is he talking about with the other package? You can probably skip to the end of the video, and I'm gonna talk about that at the very end. Is the other option there. Otherwise, default them when you're playing no CA. If you're playing CA, you just don't have the points for them. They're fine talents. They're good talents. You just don't have the points for them because they have to go into buffing your Coordinated Assault. Next, we have Spear Focus. You don't cast Mongoose Bite / I guess you have to have Mongoose Bite to take this. You don't cast Mongoose Bite enough for this to be worth. And like I said, I don't even recommend Mongoose Bite to begin with. So this becomes we're just not taking it. Next, we have Viper's Venom. This allows you to... You just don't cast Serpent Sting on single target anymore. Even if you have a drought in Serpent Sting, it's still not worth the global. It's still a better global to hit the Raptor Strike, overall damage, and eventually you'll get the proc. But oftentimes this doesn't matter at all, and you just have Serpent Sting on your priority target from either casting Raptor Strike Mongoose Bites or from Volatile Bomb or Green Bomb, which we'll talk about in a minute here. So we take these 2 points all the time. It leads into the good shit. You got to take them. Next, we have crit damage, increased by 4%. Typically, you're playing pretty high crit on this class. We play haste crit for the most part. So crit damage, again, just feeds into what our stats are and also feeds into Fury of the Eagle, which when we get here, we'll talk about this as well. This is just a generally good talent. It's just raw damage. You take it all the time. Sweeping Spear, we've talked about. I default this always. Not going to talk about it anymore. Then we have Bloody Claws. Don't take this. Again, the Mongoose Bite talents, these are all single target stuff. You're not going to take this in Mythic Plus. It's basically useless in the way we do damage in AoE situations. Next, we have Wildfire Infusion, which is, for me, the core talent of this spec. If I was unable to play this talent, I would probably not play Survival, right? Like, this is just like, this is what makes Survival cool. It's a little bit toned down, and I wish Volatile Bomb still had some strength it had from the past. But this gives you a little bit this is kind of the core mechanic you're playing around on the class. Basically, every time you throw a bomb, the next one you get will be one of the other two bombs. So, like, for example, when you're out of combat for so long, you'll default to Shrapnel Bomb, always. I think it's 20 seconds out of combat, you'll default to having a Shrapnel Bomb in the chamber. Shrapnel Bomb applies a bleed, or applies a debuff that makes it so your Raptor Strike and Butchery apply a bleed. So typically after, you want to make sure you get 3 stacks, because it stacks up to 3, whether it be on single target or AoE, using Raptor Strike or Butchery, depending on the situation, to apply that bleed after you cast your Shrapnel Bomb. Sometimes you won't have globals for it to get the full 3 stacks because you're doing other stuff, but that's generally the goal. Next, you have your Red Bomb or Pheromone Bomb, which makes it so kill command will always reset if they have the Pheromone Bomb, it's a 6-second cooldown. 9-second debuff? I think it's 6. So in those 6 seconds, your kill command will always reset no matter what. Important to play around on single target. AoE, it's a little bit less important to play around because you're casting a few less kill commands in there, but it's important to, if you know you have a red bomb coming up, kind of dump your focus because you're going to build it back up with a bunch of kill command resets before you chuck your red bomb. And then we have Volatile Bomb, which now in Dragonflight applies Serpent Sting to 3 targets and then also pops for damage against targets that already had Serpent Sting. So this has some synergy with Hydra's Bite that we talked about earlier. The Volatile Bomb, it's way less potent than it was in previous expansions because they've added the Serpent Sting application. But again, this comes back to the fact that often you're not casting Serpent Sting. Especially in AoE, you're casting so many bombs that Serpent Sting's just on stuff most of the time. And on single target, it's certainly on stuff. The combination of Viper's Venom and Wildfire Infusion you are not casting Serpent Sting. So I know we talked a lot about Serpent Sting earlier. Just for me to say, like, in combat, you're not really casting it. It's like you cast it as mobs are grouping, or if you're out of range and you have nothing else to hit. Because I think it's like it takes like over a minute or almost a minute if you were to cast. Say you just sat there and just spammed Serpent Sting while you were out of range of something. The Serpent Sting cast is 10 focus, and in the global cooldown you regen, I think it's 7.5 focus, just baseline. So it's almost focus neutral, which means that you're not going to lose damage once you can connect to the boss by just spamming Serpent Sting while you're out of combat or while you're out of range. So worth noting, I guess, like have it bound at least to be able to do that, because there will be some fights where you have to walk away, you don't have a global to hit, and in those times you do hit Serpent Sting, because it's focus neutral almost, so it doesn't affect the damage you do when you come back into melee. Next we have Quick Shot, which is in the default no CA build. We will take Quick Shot just because it unlocks Ranger, but we'll talk about that in more depth later. I think this talent sucks. It does nothing. So in a couple minutes here, we'll talk about that more in depth, but not sick, because it only procs off. It has a chance to proc off when your kill command resets. So you gain some value if you're playing Flanker's Advantage on it, but this talent's really bad. We'll come back to it. Next we have Coordinated Assault, which we'll talk about all this here, all the talents below it. This cooldown owns. I love the way this plays. I was unsure how I was going to feel about it coming back to the game this season, and not really being like, oh, what the hell is this? But I think it's awesome. And it comes with the full package underneath. So baseline, it what is it actually baseline? Baseline, it just empowers your ability. So basically, you hit Coordinated Assault for the next 20 seconds. Your pet's special cast, which is either Bite, Claw, or Smack, depending on what your pet is. When they cast that ability, which has a 3-second cooldown, they will empower your next cast, whether that be Wildfire Bomb or Kill Shot. Wildfire Bomb gets a bonus 20% damage to the initial hit, so the impact, not the dot, and Kill Shot makes it to cause it to bleed for half of Kill Shot's damage over another 6 seconds. In every situation, the Kill Shot Empower is more valuable than the Wildfire Bomb value, except for one, which I'll talk about. Again, that's part of the Quick Shot thing. We'll talk about that at the very end. So you're going to want it. There are some macros that you will use, which can be found in, I'll link the 2 guides, Icy Veins and Wowhead, both put together guides. I'm not the greatest person to be talking about that. I just kind of use the macros and don't think too much about it. But they talk about the reasons why, and maybe we'll get into that in another video, because there is some min-maxing to do here beyond just the macros. But I think that's like, it's very minor, and that's like a more like advanced guide, I guess, not while we're talking about just talents. And then Mythic Plus down here, you're always going to take Coordinated Kill. This is, I think this is the coolest part of Coordinated Assault. The empowerment is like great, but it reduces the cooldown of your Wildfire Bomb by 50% and the cooldown of your Kill Shot by 50%, causes your Wildfire Bomb to generate focus, and it makes it so Kill Shot can be used against any target regardless of health. So this allows you to actually use Kill Shot inside Coordinated Assault. And then finally, we take Birds of Prey, which makes Kill Shot strike 3 additional targets, makes it hit 4 targets total. All of those targets get the bleed, by the way, and that's what makes this the huge value spell inside your cooldowns. These for me are always takes if you're playing Coordinated Assault. I don't think Bombardier gets value anywhere. I tried it in a freehold just to see, and empowering bombs instead of kill shots. Don't think it was great. I think you just have too many bombs anyway, especially with the CDR. Like it's almost difficult to get as much value out of this as you think you would in AoE, just because Carve is so massive. Carve combined with Coordinated Kill, or sorry, not Carve, Butchery with Coordinated Kill just makes the cooldown on your bombs so low. A lot of your pulls with Coordinated Assault, you're going to be enlusted as well, and the cooldown on bombs is hasted, so it's even shorter. And if you're playing with a Shadow Priest, you might be getting the PI as well, which is a huge, like basically another mini lust that's more CDR. So it's just like, it's like so hard to even cast all your bombs and get like proper value out of this that you just run Birds of Prey. And it's more damage anyway. It's just better. So essentially, once you get those macros and everything, your rotation inside Coordinated Assault ends up being cast as many kill shots as you can, cast as many bombs as you can, and that's it. And it's great. I think I take this in every dungeon. So you can try the no Coordinated Assault build, but I think once you get used to Coordinated Assault, it feels so good. You get into a rhythm inside your cooldowns. You feel like you're owning, and it's just, I would never not take it at this point. Then we have Killer Companion. You're never taking this, ever. This talent is terrible. Skill Command does no damage. We'll talk about these down here since you're not taking these as well. Spearhead is, again, this is a single target. It's just straight up your Mongoose Bite, Raptor Strike, Kill Command damage. Not taking this in Mythic Plus. Deadly Duo empowers that. Not taking it in Mythic Plus. Under no circumstances. It's just, even in like a single target dungeon or a more single target dungeon like Vortex, you're just not taking it. So now we get down to our final talents. This is it. We got Ranger, we'll talk about. This is an always take. It just does so much damage. Serpent Sting damage by 40%, Explosive Shot damage by 40%, Kill Shot damage by 40%. Now, if we look at my breakdown from his Freehold, Kill Shot, Explosive Shot, Serpent Sting. So 40% buffed damage to 3 of your top 6 abilities, and that's assuming you include Daniel in here, my pet. It basically doesn't count. So it's basically 3 of your top 5 spells. Yes, please. We'll take that talent. You will always take this. And then finally, Fury of the Eagle. This was, I think, debatable at first. I tried out just playing Explosives Expert and not worrying, or Explosive Expert and just Fury of the Eagle and no Ruthless Marauder. I think the combo of Ruthless Marauder and Fury of the Eagle is really good. I think it is really, really good, and I would not swap it out anymore. I tried the build out just to be like, man, wouldn't it be cool if I just casted infinite bombs with the CDR and all this? And it was cool. Like, don't get me wrong, it was cool. But I think the Fury of the Eagle is just better. This is a great AoE button. Basically, it's basically Fist of Fury on a 45-second cooldown. And then you take a Ruthless Marauder to make it so when mobs are below 65% health, you have a 50% increased crit chance against them, and it gives you CDR on your bombs when you crit. So with my gear, at least, I have like a little bit over 40% crit. So the 50 puts me at basically 100% crit. I'm above 90% crit on these mobs. When I hit Fury of the Eagle, it gives you a bomb reset, essentially. You dump your bombs before you spend this. Now, I've seen some discussion around the Survival Hunter community about how do you play an AoE pull with CA and Fury of the Eagle are both up. And I think technically on paper, casting the Fury of the Eagle before, like, so you pull up the pack, you Explosive Shot, Death Chakram, dump your bombs, Fury of the Eagle, then Coordinated Assault. Or then dump at least 1 bomb so you're not sitting on 2, then Coordinated Assault and go. And then you'll get another Fury of the Eagle later in the pack. Problem is, most packs don't last that long. Even on the higher keys that I'm pushing right now, a lot of the times on your CA pack, it's 2-minute cooldown pack. A lot of your group has 2-minute cooldowns there. So you would think, like, all right, the keys are getting higher, like, let's blast this. But usually everybody has cooldowns, especially if you're playing with a Shadow Priest, for example, where you're syncing up PI with them. You're going to have cooldowns the same time as your Shadow Priest. And whenever you pull up with your 2 minutes, pack's going to die pretty fast, right? So oftentimes, if you spend that extra 10 seconds-ish at the beginning to get this Fury of the Eagle off, and then you get your CA off, and then your Fury of the Eagle is not quite back up at the end. It does get CDR when you get kill command resets, but you're not casting that many kill commands inside Coordinated Assault. So you don't quite have Fury of the Eagle back off cooldown by the end. And now it's like, man, I didn't get an execute Fury of the Eagle because I used one at the beginning, and now my Fury comes back up for the beginning of the next pack, and I'm in the same situation where, like, I'm just casting this without getting the full value of Ruthless Marauder. So I would toy with how you play around this spell, but I would lean towards sending Coordinated Assault first. Now, I know this is technically on paper wrong, so if you want to comment or let me know what situation you think or exactly to prove how I'm wrong here, go for it, because I'm basically saying, like, yeah, I know you probably can figure out a way to mathematically show me this is wrong. But I think in most situations, in most keys, in most pulls, you have Coordinated Assault, especially if you're playing lower keys. That stuff's going to die before your Coordinated Assault's even over a lot of the time. Because this cooldown owns. You do so much damage inside both of these. And then you lose the value from the Fury of the Eagle execute, which is nice because especially on like this week, like bolstering week, for example, having this essentially execute, this button does double damage below 65% to like clean up mobs as they're starting to get bolstered is really good. You have this full channel into your wildfire bombs, and it's great. I will say another thing I want to mention here because I'm assuming most of you are at least trying to get the staff or the polearm from Rashok. I have a heroic version, the Dejarun Pillar of the Elder Flame. The weapon generally sucks for survival because so many of our spells are not technically melee spells. So it only procs off a few spells. It procs off Flanking Strike, Raptor Strike, Mongoose Bite, Carved Butchery, Fury of the Eagle, and the Spearhead activation. I say Flanking Strike? It's Flanking Strike as well. So we cast kill commands a lot. We cast bombs a lot. None of those spells proc it. So with that, what I have done and what I think is the correct thing to do with this, I think they're still working on like trying to simulate what's actually correct and how you play around the weapon to get the most value of it. Just macro it in to Fury of the Eagle. Fury of the Eagle gets 5 ticks in the channel, which hasted is going to be less than 3 seconds. That's the absolute most value for the time you're going to get, right? 3 seconds, typically that's 3 globals. So even if you cast 3 Raptor Strikes, you got 3 procs. Whereas in that same amount of time with Fury of the Eagle, you're going to get 5 procs and then do what you will after that. Typically, you try to fit your butcheries in there in AoE to get a few procs, but generally it doesn't do a lot of damage for our spec. It's doing a lot of damage for others, like right here, it's less than 1% overall. You'll see it doing a lot of damage for others, like Brewmaster Tank, for example, because those classes have percent damage amps, whether it be debuffs to targets or buffs to themselves, which the spear is interacting with right now. All we have is Death Chakram for that, and it's only 10%, and it's usually not a Death Chakram Fury of the Eagle angle, unless you do what I talked about earlier, where you're Furying before Coordinated Assault. But in that situation, you're now Furying, and then you're hitting Coordinated Assault, and then you're getting no more procs, right? So another thing to think about when you're deciding when to Fury. That's just a little tidbit. I would add that on to your macro with Fury of the Eagle, which in that macro, which we'll talk about earlier, I mentioned Bloodseeker. So Fury of the Eagle, let me just pull up this macro for you guys here, if I can find where I have it, just to show you. This is a little bit small on the screen, but as you can see, I have Cancel Aura Bloodseeker, use 16, cast Fury of the Eagle. Now, there's a bug. I think it's a bug. It's probably a bug. It feels like a bug with Fury of the Eagle right now, where attack speed, specifically attack speed, not haste, is shortening the channel time, but not increasing the tick rate of Fury of the Eagle. So you're losing hits if you have a lot of attack speed from Bloodseeker, for example. So you bind the Cancel Aura Bloodseeker into Fury of the Eagle so that that doesn't happen. You cancel it out. You don't, because Bloodseeker is not haste, right? It's just attack speed. Whereas haste reduces the channel time of Fury of the Eagle, but also makes it so the ticks happen faster. So haste is fine. You don't have to worry about, oh man, I'm in Bloodlust, don't hit Fury of the Eagle. Like, no. It's just attack speed having this weird interaction where it's reducing the channel time, but not increasing the tick rate. So you're losing the final tick a lot of the time if you have too much attack speed. So you just bind that in. Use 16 as the mount or the weapon slot. So that's just activating my Pillar of Flame, canceling Bloodseeker, and then you'll get your 5 ticks. You'll get the full Fury of the Eagle channel. So that's worth mentioning here. You want to use that macro for sure. Now, I said I would talk about Quick Shot at the end, specifically for the no CA build. Now, Quick Shot is taken to get Ranger. That is the only reason this talent is taken. It does basically nothing. In this dungeon, if I had taken Quick Shot, look, I had 248 million total damage. This talent would have maybe done 500k. Maybe 600k total damage. And this is a 250 million damage. An overall of 169k. You're talking about a spell doing 5 seconds worth of your DPS. Like it's just not, I don't know. It's not good. It's very bad. So what can you do instead? So you can take baseline Coordinated Assault.
Now, base coordinated assault obviously is not very powerful. A lot of the value in this comes from coordinated kill and birds of prey, right? The baseline effect is just, it's a 32k hit, it's a gap closer, and it buffs your bleeds or your bombs, right? Now, that 32k, if you cast that on cooldown, is going to do almost as much as quick shot. It's probably going to do about half as much damage as quick shot. If you just use this as you just hit the button, you don't think about it anymore. No thought whatsoever. But obviously it does more than that. So in an AoE situation, it's typically going to take, I did like a little bit of napkin math. It's typically going to take like 50-ish hits of bomb, hits, not casts, hits of bomb to be buffed by this 20% to catch up to the quick shot damage, which you could get 50 hits in one cast, depending on the dungeon, right? In a freehold, say you pull the 9 mobs at the beginning, you hit coordinate assault during this, and you empower 4 bombs during that. 4 times 9 is 36. You're more than halfway there in that. I think you can get a total empowerment of 6. You can get 6 total empowerments in here, but there's sometimes it's a little bit tough to get those, depending on what the cooldown is on the spell when you activate it, and like some little pet finickiness. But if you get 6 empowerments on 9 mobs, you're already at 54 total hits. So even just on that pack, it's possible to outshine Quickshot in the first pull of Freehold. Like it's not. So Quickshot becomes the passive, and a lot of people play this because they don't want to think about hitting coordinate assault, which is fine. I get that totally. But I would try, if you're interested in an OCA build, I would try just playing baseline coordinate assault. You don't really have to play with the macros if you don't want to. In fact, in AoE, it's better to not play with the macros if you're just playing this and you don't have the kill shot cleave. Because in that situation, you want to empower your bombs. Now, single target, you're still going to want to empower bleeds if you're playing CA, but it's going to be a lot less impactful because you don't have the 50% CDR, right? So you're not really going to be casting that many kill shots. So it's probably worth not playing with the macro on single target as well. If you're playing this, you just hit CA instead of turning your pet's auto attack off. So I just wanted to mention that about quick shot. I know this is recommended, and I would recommend this. I would lean into recommending, because the whole point of playing OCA is I'm not trying to think about shit. I am trying to hit all my buttons on cooldown and then hit Fury the Eagle and then hit all my buttons on cooldown again, and then I'm done thinking. While still doing good damage. There's some dungeons that's going to be competitive, if not maybe a little bit better overall than playing with CA, but less control over your damage. By that I mean you have less, like, I got 2 minutes for this pack, we're going to bust it up. So if you're just messing around, I don't know if you guys are all like me. Maybe you're watching a talent video, and if you got to this part of the video, you're probably like me, where you're just like way too like obsessive over these little decisions, and you really like thinking about them. I would encourage you to try playing with baseline CA, and it gives you another little gap closer. Like sometimes you want to have this little, I got to jump here, my harpoon's on cooldown, I don't have disengage, let me just hit CA as a gap closer. And that's a fine use, and I think even that is arguably more value than the damage you'll get from quick shot. But you're taking quick shot to get to Ranger, so you got to take one of these two. Ranger's too good not to take. You can't put the point elsewhere. So try it out. I think Freehold's a really good dungeon to try out playing no CA. So I would give that a shot. And then I'll go through these dungeons real quick and kind of talk about where I would recommend both builds. And really it's just Freehold, Brackenhide, maybe Uldaman that I would like recommend the no coordinated assault as somewhere to try it, that you're going to get the most value out of. I think coordinated assault is very good for everything else. There's maybe an argument for it in Underrot as well, for just playing the no CA build here. But I'm a huge fan. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of CA in those dungeons already. So you're not going to convince me otherwise. But it's definitely places you could try. As far as places I would definitely play CA, and I would not even consider playing no cooldown build, are Netharian's Lair and Vortex Pinnacle. Unless the key is like way too low that you're just like, say you're farming 11s to get heroic crests or whatever. You can play no CA, it's fine, because the packs are going to die in 10 seconds. You're going to not have your cooldowns very often, so you can just play no coordinated assault in those dungeons and be fine. But generally, if it's a dungeon that like I'm trying a little bit, or it's a dungeon you're challenging yourself with, or key level you're challenging yourself with, I would definitely play coordinated assault in these 2 dungeons for sure. I think it gets the most value in those 2. And then obviously Freehold, Brackenhide being the maybe lowest. I don't want to say lowest value, but you'll get good mileage out of no cooldown or no CA in those dungeons for sure. And everything else is kind of in between. The other 4, you'll kind of have to play with them and see what you like. And I think that's it. I know this probably is way too long-winded for most people trying to consume content on YouTube, but if you're here still and you liked listening to my thoughts about these talents, I appreciate you. Hopefully going to get a little bit more YouTube content. I'm kind of just have some time to go ham this summer. So we'll get what I can out as far as some maybe rotational guides, some commentary on some dungeons coming up. So if you're interested in that, would be awesome if you like the video and then subscribe to the channel, and we'll see what else we get over the summer. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'll be taking a look at what you guys have to say, or if you want to tell me I'm a moron and sorry, what am I pulling up here? I'm a moron and I should never take Hydra's Blade and Raptor Strike sucks, like for sure. Like let me know. You got evidence to prove otherwise. I'm not here to be like this is the right talent and that's it. We're done talking about it. I definitively think this is the best build to play for sure, but open to suggestions. So and yeah, good luck in your keys. Hope you guys have fun. I'll see you in the next one.